Welcome to Muted in Medicine, the podcast where we break the silence on the untold stories and pressing issues within the healthcare profession. Join us as we dive deep into topics that often linger in the shadows of medical corridors and are not discussed in conferences, meetings, social gatherings, and in the hallways. They are often hiding. From navigating errors and facing litigation to the often overlooked realm of mental health among healthcare professionals. Through candid conversations and storytelling, we aim to amplify the voices and shed light on challenges that resonate across the medical landscape. So grab your stethoscope and a cup of coffee and tune in as we uncover the layers of complexity in the world of healthcare that are so muted, yet so profoundly impactful.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Muted in Medicine podcast. My name is Sabah Fatma, and I'll be your host for this podcast. I'm a pediatrician with a passion for helping healthcare professionals facing secondary trauma at work in healthcare, which often they're unprepared to face, and spreading more awareness about it. And with this podcast, we hope to discuss some of the most silenced topics in medicine that are often not openly discussed. Today, we're diving into one of the most heartbreaking and urgent issues in medicine: suicide amongst healthcare workers. The statistics are sobering. Physicians are nearly twice as likely as the general population to die by suicide, with an estimated 300 to 400 physicians lost each year in the United States alone, an entire medical school class gone. Nurses and other healthcare staff also face disproportionately high suicide rates, a reflection of the immense emotional toll that comes with caring for others, while often neglecting their own well-being. And often when I look at the pictures and social media of the healthcare workers who have committed suicide, I see smiling faces, reminding me that in healthcare we often wear masks of perfectionism. This episode is dedicated to every healer who has struggled in silence. You're not alone, and we will keep talking about this. To help us understand this crisis and explore the human stories behind the statistics, we are joined by Betsy Gall, author of The Illusion of the Perfect Profession. Betsy is speaking all over the country about physician suicide after her oncologist husband, Dr. Matthew Gall, tragically and unexpectedly took his own life on Thanksgiving Day in 2019. Betsy's book is a story about love, physician suicide, and finding comfort and purpose in the aftermath. Betsy has 3 children and is an active real estate agent and investor. She continues to give back to the Angel Foundation and the Dr. Lorna Breen Foundation. Betsy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dr. Fatima, for having me. I appreciate you.
We ask everybody when we start the podcast, what is bringing you joy today, Betsy? And it could be anything.
Oh, gee, I have a lot of joy in my life. I talked to all 3 of my children today, and everybody's doing really good. So that's always joyous. And I've mentioned quick, I'm in Atlanta with my fiance. I'm getting married in June.
So awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you. So lots to look forward to and joy right now in my life.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Glad to hear that. I want you to share your story. I mean, I talked about it a little bit, but share your personal connection to the topic of suicide in healthcare workers, because I know you're not in healthcare yourself.
I am not. Yeah. So I was married to an oncologist for 20 years, and I met Matthew right when he was finishing up his residency at UIC. He decided to go into oncology, took a fellowship at the University of Minnesota. And so we lived in Minnesota for, I think it was 16 years. And he was with a large private practice there. I guess I just never really understood the pressure that our doctors are under and that they face each and every single day, even though I lived with one for 20 years. We moved to North Carolina in August of 2019 for Matthew to take a job with a smaller private practice. And there were numerous reasons that we made this decision. Um, but we got to North Carolina, and he was there for about a week when he started saying things like this was career suicide, and I feel like I made a fatal mistake. To me, I was like, okay, it's a job, we can move. And for whatever reason, he just couldn't really wrap his head around that. He was really embarrassed. He felt like he had made a big mistake with his career. And so he fell into this deep depression. And he was not somebody that I had ever seen face depression before. He was like the happiest guy you ever met. He loved our kids. He loved me. He enjoyed simple pleasures of life like mountain biking and going to concerts. He loved the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was just a great guy. His nickname was Fun Guy. That's what the kids called him because he was really fun. And he just could not get out of this depression. It hit him really, really fast. And he ended up taking his own life on Thanksgiving Day of 2019. So it was a very short bout with depression. It was 3 months, but I always, I was saying at his funeral, Matt lived life to the fullest and he went really hard all the time. So it didn't really surprise me that depression hit him so hard, but I was unfamiliar with the topic whatsoever until I, unfortunately had a crash course in it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so sorry for your loss. And I mean, I think we can never be prepared for that, right?
No, never. I mean, death of a spouse is one thing, and it's awful for anybody that has to go through it. But death by suicide is just a very complex way to die. And I tell people all the time, my husband went to work every single day to save lives. And the fact that he took his own is just simply hard to comprehend. And we're 5 years out, and it's still hard to comprehend.
Was there any part during you started realizing that something was happening, like when you were with Matthew, or did you have any inkling of how depressed he was?
Well, it was very strange. So, Matt was just like, go, 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 right? Like anything he put his mind to. I mean, like lots of doctors are like that, right? I mean, you have to work hard to get into med school um, and then, do a residency, which is brutal. And then, a fellowship. I mean, I think he had like 15 years of schooling after high school.
Oh.
So I had never seen him struggle with depression before until we got to North Carolina and he felt like he had made a big mistake. So then I started seeing signs and it was very nerve wracking. And the whole reason my book came about was because I literally felt God wrap his arms around me and say, right. Because, I had never really I journaled on and off, but nothing like every day that I was doing, like literally recording what was happening. And what was happening was he'd come home from work. He never stopped working. He'd come home from work and he'd lay on the couch, which was very uncharacteristic of him. He couldn't do things like he loved taking care of the lawn. He couldn't mow the lawn. He loved to grill and he couldn't grill. It was just like this total shutdown. I had always been an early riser. I get up, work out, do all that. He always got a good solid 8 hours of sleep. He completely stopped sleeping, I would say about 3 weeks into this move, which I knew was going to be hard, but I didn't think it would be that hard. I mean, we've traveled the world. He was a real adventurous guy. It wasn't like we were moving to a different country. So that kind of took me back. But when he stopped sleeping, that things got very bad. And I was worried because, he was an oncologist and dealing with life and death situations every single day. He needed to be on his game and he was tired, but he just kept going.
And was it the fact that it was I don't know if you guys ever talked like a smaller job, or is it less work, or?
I don't know exactly. I just think it wasn't a good fit for him. which not every job is, right? And so I kept saying, well, we had a lake house in northern Minnesota. And I said, we'll just go back to the lake. He had a non-compete in Minneapolis where he left and a non-compete in North Carolina. So that created a very stressful feeling for him. Like he felt like he was trapped. And that was really unfortunate. And I think that those need to go away. But it just wasn't a good fit for him. And, he was such a top performer that he really felt shameful that he had made this, mistake with his career. So, um, it was just really sad and unfortunate. And I saw it as a job where now after digging a little bit deeper, I mean, being a doctor was the majority of his identity. So when he started to feel like he couldn't do that anymore, I think he lost hope and it was just game over. It was awful.
Yeah. You've been with him for 20 years. You only saw it in the last 3 months. Had you ever kind of seen it before? Like he getting frazzled?
Whenever there's a suicide, we all become investigators. So you start going back in your mind like, huh, okay. I mean, he had a little bit of OCD, which I think a lot of doctors do because, you want to do the best job that you can. But I mean, his was a little over the top, with just doing things like the lawn. Um, but he never really struggled with depression. No, I mean, that was what was so shocking. And part of the reason why I felt called to get my story out there, there were 1,000 people at his funeral thinking, what the heck happened to Dr. Gall? Because we didn't see this at all. And frankly, I hadn't either. So, I just, there was a lot, COVID hit after he died. And, we ended up moving back to Minnesota. I kept my house in North Carolina and rented that out. But, when I got back there, I started doing the research on why physicians die by suicide. And who knew there was a whole book on it by Dr. Michael Myers, Why Physicians Die by Suicide. And I started going through that book. And that's when I really realized he had a lot of the same qualities as other physicians in the book. Had just top performer, felt like he could never do enough. He was really, he had a hard time with administrative, he called them the suits, telling him what to do and how much time he could spend with patients. I think it was really frustrating. He talked about the clicks a lot, that he had to get through his day with all the clicks on the computer. But as far as like signs of depression, I didn't see it, I really didn't.
Yeah. And did you ever get help during that time that he was struggling?
Well, that was the biggest problem was I was confined, here we had just moved to a new town. I know nobody. I have 3 teenagers that I'm trying to get acclimated into school. And my husband, my partner, is just crashing. So I was just trying to keep my head above water and keep everybody going. And I was confiding into with one of his physician friends back in Minnesota. And he said, Betsy, he's got to sleep, exercise, get on an antidepressant, and see a psychiatrist. Well, I couldn't get him to do anything. And I was trying to find a psychiatrist. But at that point, I mean, that was like, we had that conversation maybe 3 days before he died. So there was about a month before, it was like, I'm trying to get him to get help. And he was just so highly embarrassed that he wouldn't. And then here I come to find out that most doctors that do get help, they cross state lines, they use fake names, and they pay cash. Well, he didn't even have time to go across the state line because all he was doing was working. He was on call, the night before he died. He was suicide. And I write very graphically about everything that happened as far as the timeline. But the night before he died, he had become suicidal and he ended up in the ER. And then they sent him home with a sleeping pill, and that just didn't work. And then he woke up on Thursday morning, and that's when our whole world unraveled, shattered. But
Mm.
he wouldn't get help. That was a real problem. He was a very strong-willed, proud, and he never wanted to show weakness.
Right.
And, that's how y'all are trained in med school. Don't show weakness.
Right.
And
Right.
so I think he felt like a real failure, and this was the only way that he saw out, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah, it is. You've done a lot of research now on physician suicide, and you've been advocating all over the country. And the title of your book is really intriguing, actually. I love it. The Illusion of the Perfect Profession.
Yeah.
What's the story behind the title, and what did you find? So, how do you think the healthcare system contributed to your loss, and what are some of the flaws in it?
Well, I think the whole healthcare system needs an overhaul, and I think it starts with residency. I think the lack of sleep and the lack of money that they
Yeah.
pay the residents, frankly, I just think the whole system needs to
Yeah.
be reworked.
Yeah.
The title, I knocked around a bunch of titles, but for me, you know, everybody thinks like, oh, you're going to marry a doctor, a lawyer, fireman, or, you know, it just was not what I thought. I mean, as a little girl, you don't think about what being a doctor really entails. And it is 24/7. I kind of explain it to people. Everybody knows somebody with cancer. So even though Matt would work, 10, 12-hour days some days, and he'd come home and have dinner and sit down, and the phone would ring, and it would be a friend who had, a friend of a friend, or a mother or sister, brother, or somebody with cancer. Um, and so it's real hard to turn it off. And I think you he went into healthcare to help people. So he had a very big heart. And I think every single little patient death took a part of his heart. And they just don't prepare you for that. I don't think that there's really any way that you can be prepared for that. Um, and so the name just came about because it just came to me. It's an illusion, like this perfect job, like this perfect doctor. Well, I mean, it's just unrealistic. It's a tough job. I think it's actually one of the hardest jobs there is in the world. And uh, I'm raising the red flag and talking about it because I think our country needs a big wake up call. I mean, we're headed for a doctor shortage. We're lucky in this country to have such great health care. And I think with everything that's happened, the role of a physician has been diminished. And, I think it's like 80% of hospitals now own practices, whereas before it used to be, mainly private practice. And Matt really believed in that model. He felt he liked having control over,
Yeah.
somewhat control. So that was tough.
Yeah. And you said something about doctors having to cross lines to get help. And tell me more about that.
Yeah, I found that really interesting because he was a physician, right? Like you think like, okay, you have all this knowledge, just
Right.
get help. And at the end of Matt's life, I mean, he he knew he had depression. I mean, he knew it,
Yeah.
and he was trying to hide it. The problem is too, we don't have enough psychiatrists. I mean, I couldn't even I couldn't find one. And that was a very short period of time that I was actively trying to
Right.
find somebody to help him. But
Right.
like he needed like immediate help, like right then. And I just couldn't find that. So I found that statistic or fact, I guess. It's not really a statistic, but fact that our doctors are so embarrassed that there's such a stigma around, getting mental health care that they would actually cross state lines and then pay cash and use a fake name. I mean, that's ridiculous. I think that, if you're asking for help, that should be a sign of strength. And our doctors are people, they're not robots, they're human, and we need to treat them as such.
Yeah. Something that you said, there is the illusion that of this perfect profession. So people also think, doctors are in it for the money. They don't care. There's so many misconceptions around just physicians. And I think because you've gone through it, but it's really nice to hear it from a non-physician too.
Yeah.
That you realize that. And
well, I go on the road and tell people our doctors do not make enough money.
yeah,
I mean, everybody thinks that they're making a ton of money. I don't know what other profession you go into
yes,
for $250,000
yes,
yourself
yeah,
with taking out med school loans
yes,
to hopefully, make that back. I mean, I just don't think people really get it.
yeah,
And I'm very bold too. I think being a physician killed my husband. I'm just gonna, I just say it. If he wasn't a doctor, I think he'd probably still be alive. Now, he knew he wanted to be a doctor when he was 3 years old. And everybody around him told him he was really smart and that he should be a doctor. And that's what he did. He put his mind to it, and that's what he did. He loved people. He loved caring for people. And the early years of his career were really lucrative. The group was, I think it was lean and it was physician run, and he loved it. He loved it. But over the years, things changed, and just like in big government, when things get bloated, and you have all these administrators telling you what to do, the job just gets diminished. And I'm like, he went to med school. These administrators did not. So I just like to tell people, I don't think our doctors make enough money. And I also think that if we paid them more money, we'd get even, the best and the brightest. And that's just the nature of the beast, right? I mean, you put it out there, we want the best of the best. My husband told our children, don't go into medicine.
Mm.
That's sad. And I have a lot of friends that are doctors and tell their kids the same thing. There's a lot of easier ways to make a living.
Is that what you're telling your children?
My children, like after what we've been through, I didn't really need to tell them that, but my husband did tell them that. I mean, they were young at that point. They were really young. So, I have one that's going into finance. My daughter's going to go into business. And then I have one son right now that's still trying to figure things out, but he's a personal trainer.
Yeah.
And that's, their positions on it. So we just look at it. I'm so grateful for our doctors.
Yeah.
I tell people all the time, we have to thank them more.
Yeah.
Matt saved so many cards that he got. I was always so touched. Like when I was pregnant, he would come home with these gift baskets and people would make blankets. And I'm thinking, these people have cancer. And they're thinking about like me and my baby and my husband. It was so sweet. But we just need to think about them more,
Yeah. Yeah. When he lost those patients, did he take that? You said he took that to his heart. Did that affect him deeply?
Yes, very deeply. And I didn't really realize it.
Yeah.
When you're not, I used to bring my kids to the clinic every once in a while. Like we drop off lunch or something. And, you see all these patients in the chemo chairs and we get in a car. And I was always like, don't you dare for 1 minute take for granted, how lucky you are when you have your health. And then I said, daddy has to see that every day. And that's hard. But when it really hit home for me was one of my parents' friends had cancer. And he went to see Matthew. And it was aggressive and it was awful. And he ended up dying. And because they were my parents' best friends, we were going to the funeral. And on the way there, he said, do you think that John's wife is mad at me? And I stopped and I was like, man, like they loved you. And she's telling everybody how wonderful you are. you're not God. You can't save everybody. He had cancer. And that was really hard for him. He took every little thing so personally. And that broke my heart because I thought, wow, this is a lot deeper than I can even imagine. I'm selling real estate. It's not life or death. So that always kind of that one stuck with me.
Yeah, that really breaks my heart too. Yeah, but it's so true. I can connect with that. So,
well, you're human, right? So you connect with people, and especially when you go into the business of helping people, you're a healer. And then it was just so heartbreaking that he couldn't help himself. And I was just interviewed the other day, and somebody said, "Well, do you ever get mad at him?" And I said, I wouldn't get mad at Matthew if he had had cancer. So I'm not mad that he got depression. He had no more control over it than cancer had over his cancer patients. I had no idea. Like I said, I had never been touched by depression. I didn't even know a friend of a friend that died by suicide, let alone Matt Gall, who was literally the strongest person I'd ever known. So it is really scary. And I just think, that's why I'm going around talking about it, because if it could happen to him, it could happen to anyone. And unfortunately, losing 400 doctors a year to suicide, it's 400 too many. It's, it's just heartbreaking.
yeah. Yeah. And we were going to talk about, I think there's a lot of stigma around men's mental health too, because men are supposed to be strong and men are supposed to not cry. Like these things still exist. And I really want to talk about, do you think we work with these perceptions still, about men?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
And listen, Matt Gall was a macho guy. He was a guy. He
Yeah.
was, I think I saw him cry probably, twice, 2 or 3 times in our whole 20 years together. And
Yeah.
like when our children were born, he was a softie, but he was a guy's guy. And I really didn't think about that until I read what Grady wrote in my book. And Grady wrote a paragraph because Grady, our oldest son, had struggled with depression. And I got to say, Matt was hard on Grady. Uh, Grady was not like Matt in the sense that, Grady was not a straight A student. Grady was not captain of the football team. Grady was his own person. And Matt being all those things, he was hard on him.
Yeah.
But I didn't really realize it until Grady called it out in the book and said, as men, we're not supposed to talk about these things. And for sure that rang true for Matt Gall, because like I said, highly embarrassed that he had depression, highly embarrassed that he had made this move and that it wasn't working out. And I just don't think, he just wasn't going to get help. I mean, he wasn't. And I tried everything, and it was really remarkable and just so heartbreaking to see. But I will just tell anybody out there listening that if there's any signs or if there's any feelings of depression, I just urge you to please get help, because you can get better. And I just, our whole world has been turned upside down and shattered. I've worked really hard to get to where I am right now, and it's by the grace of God that I am, here, because you got to keep going. But it is a rough road to travel.
Yeah. And I'm grateful to you that, you're helping other people not go through that. And I think that's just amazing, because I know it's really hard for you to share your story.
Yeah,
as well.
You see me here, I still tear up. It's 5 years later, and I don't. It's such a sad story.
Yeah.
And it was so unnecessary. So if I can just do anything, make a small difference in somebody's life, or just make somebody pause, then I feel like then I'm doing my job.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for doing that. you're talking about a lot of advocating for this. What systemic changes do you think you would like to see in healthcare when you talk about this? What things should change or that you're advocating for?
Yeah. Well, I think, I've kind of teamed up with the Dr. Lorna Green Heroes Foundation, and I'm an ambassador for them. And they're fighting for like real change in Washington. And I fully support them 1000%. Um, the invasive questioning that they ask on board exams, I think that needs to be eliminated. Um, I think we just need to make access to healthcare, mental health care. We need to make it confidential for our physicians. We need to help them get the help that they need. Like I said, I do think they all need to be paid more. I will tell you that. I don't think, I just don't understand having people pay for med school and go through this rigorous program only to get out with a ton of debt and then, be told how many minutes they have with patients, for patient care. I just think like we need hospital administrators, we need insurance companies. Obviously, we just got to figure out a better way forward where everybody can work together. And I believe that should be physician led because they're with the patients and they're out there doing the job. Now all of the sudden the corporate world has come in and taken over medicine. And I just don't think it's good for the patient. So I think we really need to work hard together. And like I say, I'm out here sharing my story, but I leave it to other people much smarter than me to figure out all those details. But I do believe that physicians need to be in charge.
Yeah, they're really bad at advocating for themselves. I don't know if you've noticed.
Time, right?
Yeah.
Who has, you're busy helping patients.
Yeah.
That would work 12 hours a day and then be on call every 6 weekend. You can't do it all the time. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a lot.
Yeah. But yeah, I agree. It's probably because you're so busy doing the things that you're supposed to doing. But I also know there's a certain sort of shame for asking for more money. And we've talked about this on the podcast too, of shame asking for money, shame asking for better hours, which is just ridiculous because it shouldn't be
Totally.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. Shame asking for more control too. What advice would you give to, I would say, young physicians, trainees, or anybody who is anywhere in their career, if they're going through certain feelings of that based on your experience, if they're feeling depressed or if they have had any thoughts of suicide, what would be your message to them?
I would say set boundaries early on in your career. Set boundaries and um, take time to do things that bring you joy because it's a heavy job. And if that, every day we have to do things that bring us joy. If that's, going for a walk outside, if that's singing to yourself, if it's, going to yoga, doing all these things to be mindful. But I think the biggest thing is setting parameters with your employer that, they don't own you. And I I would hope that people would seek help if they start to feel depressed, if they feel themselves going down that rabbit hole, if they're starting to ruminate. I mean, they need to stop in their tracks and say, I need help and put yourself first because nobody else can do that for you.
Yeah. And people are often worried about, the credentialing, the licensing, like all those questions. But I think that's where all the advocacy work is, trying to get all those invasive questions removed. But I mean, I would also say those are just questions. They're not worth your life.
Right. Exactly.
So,
Exactly. And
uh,
I know, frankly, um, I guess I shouldn't say I know, but I would think that if Matt were struggling, he would lie about it anyway, and then he would feel bad about lying. He, you guys take this, the Hippocratic oath, and he took that very, very seriously, and I just feel like there's such a there's so much pressure on our doctors to be perfect all the time and we're they're human. So you need to give yourself some grace.
Yeah. How have you, so after Matthew's passing away, how have you coped and how have the past 5 years been and how did you find peace, I think?
Yeah. Peace is hard to come by. I kind of feel like I'm finally there. So, right away, I had my kids in therapy. We all went to individual therapists and we did a couple family therapist sessions. I
Yeah.
was really fortunate that I didn't have to go to a 9 to 5 job every day to put food on my table.
Yeah.
Um, and so I could really concentrate on getting all of us the help that we needed. So we did that. My faith is very strong, and I just turned to the Bible. I'm a Christian. I turned to the Bible, and I found great solace in that, just knowing that we all suffer here on earth, and it's how you deal with that suffering that, it's your choice. So I choose to be happy. Not every day is happy, obviously. I love to exercise. I worked out a lot of like my mental anguish on the treadmill or just running, doing yoga. I think that's really important. And I guess I mean, my whole life has changed. Like I'm a totally different person than I was 5 years ago. I try to concentrate on the present and the moments that we have right now instead of looking too far in the future or obviously now looking into the past. So I joined a, a couple different like widow groups. I definitely think if you're affected by suicide, you need a group specific for suicide because it is just kind of a beast of its own. And then, I get involved at church and try to help out where I can. So that's kind of what I've done. I'm a people person, so I knew I didn't want to be alone for the rest of my life. And I got really lucky, met a great guy. And we are just living and having a great time. The kids adore him. And I feel really blessed in that sense. So I'm planning a wedding, which is
Yeah,
really
that's
fun and
amazing.
kind of weird at the
That's
same
awesome.
time.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that for you.
Life is short. So I think
Yeah.
you have to make a decision what you want your life to look like after you've been struck with tragedy. But
Yeah.
literally all of us every single day can wake up and make a decision about what we want our life to look like and then go for it.
Yeah.
But we only have one. So I urge people to just get out there and do what makes them happy.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I really love that for you. How are your kids doing and how did they cope with this?
Yeah, the kids, it was so interesting. They all dealt with the grief so different. Sophie and I were just talking about this the other day because she was 13. I found a letter that she had written to Matt actually on Thanksgiving Day, and it was heartbreaking. Daddy, you died today. Who's going to walk me down the aisle when I get married? And all of these things that are just so overwhelmingly sad. But she kind of put on like a happy face. She was our happy girl. And I was like really nervous about that because it just wasn't normal. She went
Yeah.
to a birthday party the day after he died and just kind of kept going. And it manifested itself like a year later. Things started to not go so well for Sophie and she made some poor decisions. But right now, she kind of came out of that. She's a freshman at Ole Miss and she's just thriving and she's in a sorority. She's very social. She's just doing great. Gavin, who is most like Matt, my middle son, extremely bright, puts a lot of pressure on himself. And I'm constantly telling him, like, go have fun, chillax a little bit. He's a finance major at University of Georgia. Also really in a really good place right now. And so he's happy. Um, and then Grady, I write about Grady a lot in the book. He was struggling, and one of the reasons I kind of wanted to move to North Carolina in the first place, he had been bullied and kind of had a tough go in middle school and then high school. And he went through a lot. Um, he kind of had a tumultuous relationship with Matt to begin with, and then ended up saving Matt's life at the day before Matt died and has had to really deal with a lot. And I gotta say, I'm so proud of that kid. he's really doing well. He's pulled himself up by his bootstraps and forging his own way in life. And so I can honestly say, like, and I pray every day, like, just thank God for the good days. I pray that it keeps going in this direction. But getting that help early on was essential. And I tell all my kids all the time, like, I do not live inside your brain. So if you need something, let me know and I will get you that. They all have their therapists on speed dial,
Yeah.
and they use them. So that's really good. And I'm proud of them for that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm sure they're great kids just looking at you. So
Yeah.
they're probably really amazing.
Yeah. Thank you.
And you wrote your book. That was a healing experience for you. How was that experience and what's coming next? I saw on your page you're working on a documentary, so I know
Yeah.
it's not a secret.
Yeah. Yeah. The book, actually, I tell everybody, everybody's like, oh, it must have been so cathartic to write it. Yeah, it was, but I hated it. I hated writing it. Like I said, I mean, I used to, when Matt was really sick, I would just walk around my neighborhood and I would cry and I would talk to God. And it was like, buckle up. He was like, buckle up, Betsy. It's going to be a bumpy ride. Just write, write, write. And so getting the book from my journals to a book, it was hard. I put a lot of pressure on myself to get it done. People kept saying, you don't have to do it, Betsy. You don't have to. But I did. I knew I had to. And so I hated writing it. It just went to the bottom of my to-do list every single day, but I knew I had to get it done. So that was a great feeling to get it done. And then all of a sudden I put it out it gets done and I'm like, oh my goodness, like these are my journals. Like it's so personal and I'm putting it out there in the world, but I just like took a leap of faith and just did it. And so that's been really great. Because I've had so many wonderful people enter my life because of it. And it's just kind of propelled this, it's not a career. I do it, I do this to help people, but I, like I said, I'm speaking all over the country and I'm fortunate enough to come into contact with a lot of other authors, a lot of other physicians that are out there fighting for the mental health and well-being of our doctors. And so, yeah, this documentary came up. I'm an angel investor in it. It does not have a name yet, but it's going to be great. And I think everybody, needs to be aware of what's happening within our medical community. And so I was really happy to be a part of it. But stay tuned because there's more to come on that one.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm very excited. I think we're going towards the end. What is something that has most surprised you or something that's most profound that you've learned through this journey? And if you have any parting words for our listeners.
Yeah, well, I guess the most profound thing is like, I had no idea that being a physician was such an incredibly difficult job before I was married to a doctor. And even being married to a doctor, it was years before we were into it that I really fully could grasp just how overwhelming the job can be and just how consuming it can be, especially when it becomes your identity, which I think you have to be careful of. So the parting words I have to say is to all of our doctors out there, all of our healthcare workers, nurses included, everybody, just thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for taking care of us. Please don't stop taking care of us, but please take care of yourself too. Because without good doctors, I just don't know where we go. Everybody's going to need a doctor at some point in their life. So just thank you. And if you are a spouse like me, I would just say, thank your doctors, tell your friends to thank their doctors. And we just really need to start talking about this unfortunate subject a little bit more until hopefully one day we don't have to.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Betsy. I think you're really amazing and your story is heartbreaking, but really it's so brave for you to share it. And I had to control my tears through the podcast because I was crying with you too.
Yeah, you're very sweet. And I'm so grateful to doctors like you that are actually, taking time to shed light on this difficult subject, because it's not fun to talk about. It's very difficult, but I'm really grateful to for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. We have a tradition on this podcast that we end it with a poem. So if you'll stay with me for that. This poem is called Finding Hope in the Broken, and it's by Erin Hansen. And it's inspired by what we've talked about today, but connection and community amongst loss and tragedy. I remember when the world broke in to rip apart my soul. For years after that one event, I thought myself not whole. My hours were spent with trying to fix it up with tape and glue, until one day I discovered everyone else was broken too. Here we were with pieces of ourselves in both our hands, so fragile and so open that I began to understand maybe I'd been greedy to want my soul all to myself, when it could be a lot more helpful in the palms of someone else. Now every time I go somewhere, I have a part of me behind and collect all of the pieces of others' souls that I can find. So when I'm meeting someone new, it's not just me they get, but also tiny fragments of all the others that I've met. And all my lives become much bigger now that it's home to things so small. And if this is what broken means, I do not mind at all. Thank you so much, Betsy.
That was beautiful. Thank you.